Good evening, everybody. Let's start with our motivation. So it's very difficult to be born as somebody who has interest in the Dharma. When we look around, most people on this planet aren't interested in it. They're much more interested in the happiness of this life, the goals of this life, having wealth and love and popularity and success in their career and whatever. Not so many people really have a deep interest in asking the big questions about for example, what's the meaning of our life and what happens after we die. So, having had that Dharma inclination awakened in us, whereby we are interested in these things and want to make our lives meaningful in a long-term way, then we should really remain true to that proclivity, to that aspiration, and not let ourselves get lost in the busyness of this life and in all the glittering things there are to be gotten in this life. And of all the things that are really meaningful to cultivate in the short time that we are alive, the bodhicitta is the best one, because it's the source of all goodness in all the realms. And so let's generate that intention to become a fully awakened Buddha for the benefit of all beings, and rejoice that we have interest in doing that and sincerity in following that path. So we just began last week chapter 7, okay, which is about abandoning attachment to sense objects on which the afflictions focus. So in this second section, in chapter 5, we talked about the bodhisattva deeds, in chapter 6 about abandoning afflictions, and then now about abandoning the attachment to the sense objects. Okay, so so last week we started going through the different lists of fetters found in the different Abhidhamma texts. Okay, so do you have any of those? Do they cause problems in your life? No? Very good. Very good. Okay. So we had also, come across in the list, especially of afflictive views, the one of wrong views. And so in the Brahmanet Sutra, in the Pali Canon, the Buddha talks about the sea monsters of the 62 wrong views. Okay. So I'll just summarize how the titles of the people who believe in these views, to give you an idea about what existed at the time of the Buddha. There were so many different philosophical views. And if you look around nowadays, there's so many different views too. Yeah? And different churches have different views, different philosophies, different New Age groups. Everybody has their own thing. Okay, so at the time of the Buddha, there were the eternalists, who proclaimed the eternity of the self in the world. In other words, there was a permanent, partless, unitary, independent self that continued like a soul from life to life, and similarly with the world. Then there were those who were partly eternalists and partly non-eternalists, who proclaimed the partial eternity and the partial non-eternity of the self in the world. So I don't know exactly what that was, but it could have said, they could have said, well, maybe the self changed while you're alive, but there's still a permanent soul that goes from life to life, or some kind of combination, of those two things. Then there's the infinitus and finitus, okay, who proclaim the finitude or infinitude of the world. Okay, so some who say the world lasts infinitely, some who say there's an end to the world, some who say there's a definite beginning of the world, some who say there's no beginning to the world. Okay. Then there's a group called the Eel Wigglers. Eel, like the water animal, eel. So they're so called because they resort to evasive statements. So just like how you can't hold an eel because it's so slippery. So these people, when you try and talk to them, you can't pin them down because every time you try to, they say, well, that's irrelevant, or that's a stupid question, or you haven't understood, or they contradict themselves in some way or another. They try to wiggle out of everything.
So politician.
Yes. Yeah. And then there's the chance originationists, who proclaim the chance origin of the self in the world. So that could be like certain people nowadays who say the whole world just evolved by chance. There's no kind of cause. An example maybe of the eternalists, might be this idea of intelligent creation, or a creation, a creator God, some kind of permanent creator that started things. Then there's those who are speculators about the past, having fixed views about the past. Okay, so having some, maybe maybe this idea like there was Atlantis, and everybody got saved and evolved from there. I don't know, something like that. I'm just trying to think of modern examples for these. Those who claim a doctrine of conscious post-mortem survival. Okay, so I don't know exactly what it was, but maybe after death, the consciousness floats up into the ether and exists somewhere. Yeah. Those who proclaim a doctrine of unconscious post-mortem survival. Okay, those who proclaim a doctrine of neither conscious nor unconscious post-mortem survival. Yeah. The annihilationists who proclaim annihilation, destruction, and non-existence of beings. In other words, they would say that at the time of death everything ceases, there's no future life, there's just nothingness. Okay. And then there's those who are proclaimers of nibbana here and now. So maybe, I don't know what those would be, but maybe people who say you're already enlightened, you just don't know it, or I'm not sure. But the idea is that there's this whole variety of different views. And you can see it nowadays too, so many different views people have, and how people structure their life around their views. So even though wrong views of the 10 disturbing pathways of karma, wrong views is considered the worst, even though it's just a mental one, because when you have wrong views, it conditions, it influences everything else about your life and how you behave, and it can really make make you create a lot of negative karma. Okay, so Gyaltsen summarizes verse 151, which was the first one in this chapter. I'll read it again. When there is no end at all to this ocean of suffering, why are you childish people not afraid of drowning in it? So he says, fraught with the whirlpool of birth and death, why aren't you ordinary childish people drowning in it? Since beginning this time, those of you who are drowning in samsara since beginning this time, why aren't you afraid? Why aren't you concerned with what's happening to you? And this is the way most of us are. I mean, even those of us who've met the Dharma, how much throughout each day do we hold in mind, like, I'm in samsara, and this is really kind of a frightful, insecure state. That thought doesn't come to our mind all the time. And yet, this is exactly the situation we're in. So then the next verse talks about how to generate aversion to samsara, and within that, the inappropriateness of attachment to youth. So Joe Blow says, while samsara has many disadvantages, okay, those who are proud of their youth and so forth aren't afraid. Yeah, which is true, when you're young, just live it up. Why be afraid of anything? So Aryadeva says, youth lies behind, and then once more it is ahead. Though one imagines it will last, in this world it is like a race. Okay, so what this means is that youth doesn't last, does it? Yeah. And so therefore pride in being young, and attractive and healthy is very inappropriate, because what you're proud of is in a state of constant decay. So in this life, youth is behind old age. In other words, we've already experienced youth, and now we're experiencing aging. Although the definition of old age changes every decade, and the definition of middle age changes also. Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in my 20s, and my friend had a secretary who was 40, and I thought she was like ancient, and she was so well preserved. And then I remember when I turned 40, it was like, wow, this is old. And now I look back and wow, 40 was really young. Yeah. Okay. So right now, youth is behind old age. But after death, then youth is once more in front of old age. Yeah, because after death, then you're going to go through youth again before you get to old age. So, although we imagine remaining young, youth, old age, and death compete as if in a race, claiming, I'm ahead, I'm ahead. Yeah. And it's kind of true, isn't it? It's like youth comes, I'm ahead. Then, middle age, I'm ahead. Then old age, I'm ahead. Then death, I'm ahead. And then it keeps circling like this from one lifetime to the other. But none of them can remain ahead. So it's unreasonable to be proud either of your youth or of your wisdom in your old age, because none of that is going to remain either. So it's just like the shadow of the wheel that crushes sesame seeds. Sometimes the shadow falls in front of the wheel, and sometimes it's in back of the wheel. Okay? So youth is an interesting thing, isn't it? How we all mostly feel young. And yet all of us are getting older and more decrepit day by day.
Moment by moment.
Yeah, moment by moment. There it goes. Okay. Then verse 153 talks about the appropriateness of fear. And here we're talking about a wisdom fear because of being governed by polluted actions and afflictions. So polluted actions are those created under the influence of ignorance, and of course afflictions are our old buddies. Okay, so why it's appropriate to be concerned about the danger of being governed by polluted actions and afflictions. Okay. So Joe Blow says, though we must go to another life, it isn't frightening. Joe Blow sounds like he's 16 years old and knows everything. Okay. Yeah. Oh, death, it's a cinch. Nothing to it, you know. You don't need to be afraid. So Aryadeva says, in worldly existence, there is never rebirth of one's own free will. Being under others' control, who with intelligence would be fearless? Okay? So childish beings like us don't have the power to choose our own rebirth, but we're under the influence of other factors, in particular ignorance, the afflictions that arise from ignorance, and the polluted actions created by the afflictions. So we don't have our own independence, you know. We're dependent on these other factors, and these other factors all trace back to ignorance. So we know there's not going to be anything ultimately good in something that traces back to ignorance. Okay, so while in such a frightful situation of being under the control of afflictions and karma, what intelligent person would be fearless? Yeah, we should feel repugnance at being controlled by afflictions and karma. We're like a piece of wood swept by the current. But we don't feel like we're a piece of wood swept by the current. We feel like, you know, here's me and I'm in charge and I'm going to make everything happen. Yeah. And yet, you know, we really can't control that much in our lives. You know, we can influence some things, but we don't have lasting control because, you know, things are under the influence of other factors, of other causes and conditions. We cannot prevent our body from aging, okay? We cannot prevent our body from ever falling ill because, you know, we might be able to prevent this or that disease temporarily, but to prevent the body from ever falling ill, we can't do that. We can't prevent the body from dying. We get ourselves into situations that are very uncomfortable, and then we go, how did I get here? Why is this happening? Okay, our minds are not in our control. All you have to do is try and focus on your breath 3 minutes, and that becomes very evident. Okay, and so isn't it rather foolish to think that, you know, I'm in control of things and I can choose whatever happens to me. You know? When our minds are so much out of our control. I mean, for example, sometimes we just get in bad moods and we can't get ourselves out of a bad mood. And we just, you know, are ruminating and depressed for days or whatever. Yeah? And so the afflictions just kind of take over. And run the show. And then, of course, karma influences what happens. Yeah? And there we are. You know, I mean, it's so interesting building Chenrezig Hall because you have a plan of what's going to happen even that day, and that's not what happens. You know, things change, different things happen. Yeah? I mean, according to our plan, we were going to be done a month and a half ago. And We're not. Okay. So, so then verse 154 it talks about advice to make effort to abandon the causes for rebirth and samsara. Okay, so since we're in this state, of being under the control, not of our own free choice, but of afflictions and karma, then how to make effort to abandon the causes for this continual rebirth in samsara. So Joe Blow says, although you're unable to cut through samsara in this lifetime because of being enthralled by pleasure, we'll try to do it in a future life. In other words, hey, everything's going really well this lifetime, I mean, I have a good career and a good family, and, I can do all the sporting activities I like, and all the musical and creative things I like, and da-da-da-da-da, and so I might as well enjoy, and then, there's another life, so I'll just practice then. So Aryadeva says, the future is endless, and you were always a common being in the past. Act so that it will never again be as it was in the past. Okay? So future rebirths are endless as long as we don't develop wisdom and get ourselves out of samsara. And past rebirths are beginningless. Okay? And throughout the past, we were only common beings, with minds overwhelmed by afflictions. And so, thinking about that, I mean, really in depth, thinking about it, how many bodies have I had since beginningless time? And you feel how attached you are to this body, and then you think, how many bodies did I have in the past? And each one of them, when I had it, I was so attached to it. And where are those bodies now? And if those bodies existed, I mean, they would just fill the whole universe. Because beginningless bodies, So, throughout the past, we were only a common being, taking one body after the next. And so we should, having met the Dharma in this life, act so that the present and the future won't be as meaningless as the past. Yeah. Because in the past we didn't liberate ourselves. We did, so many, I mean, on one hand, we did something good in the past because we created the cause for this life. On another hand, we didn't liberate ourselves, and in many lifetimes we didn't even know the Dharma, or we didn't respect the Dharma, or whatever. And so now, having this life as if by some kind of incredible streak of luck and magic, we should really make it meaningful. Do something to liberate ourselves. So we must break the continuity of rebirths. So along this line, the Array of Tree Trunks Sutra says, think of the past bodies you have meaninglessly wasted because of your desires. Think of all the bodies, all the lives that you've wasted because you live them just under the influence of wanting pleasure all the time. Pleasure, reputation, protecting our honor, being right, winning, being comfortable, being loved, all of that kind of stuff. From today, engage in the discipline of seeking awakening, and through that discipline, destroy desire. Okay, so the discipline of seeking awakening, the higher trainings in ethical conduct, concentration, wisdom, and of course, bodhicitta. Then verse 155 is about refuting that effort to abandon cyclic existence is purposeless and ineffectual. So here's Joe Blow again, and he says, does samsara have an end? If it does, we'll gain freedom without the need for effort to practice and do something. And if samsara doesn't have an end, effort is senseless. So either way, I don't have to lift a finger because it's all going to kind of happen as it happens. Now, why should I make effort to do anything about my situation? You know, I just want to flow along and be comfortable and not, you know, worry about anything. Yeah, not be concerned about anything. Go with the flow. Yeah? So it's kind of laziness, isn't it? So Aryadeva says, the conjunction of a listener, what is to be heard, and an exponent, or an expounder, a teacher, okay, is very rare. Thus, in brief, the cycle of rebirth neither has nor has not an end. Okay? So, in other words, let's go through this, okay? The conjunction of a listener, what is to be heard, and an exponent. Yeah? So a listener is somebody with a precious human rebirth who is ready to generate the spiritual paths. What is to be heard are the teachings on suchness or emptiness. And then the exponent is the Tathagata, the Buddha. So these three occurring in the world simultaneously are very rare. Okay? So to have the Buddha who is able to teach, you know, being alive and you know, being there. What is to be heard, the teachings on suchness, you know, to be there. Because a Buddha could teach a lot of other things besides emptiness. Or the teachings on suchness could have been corrupted. So having those two, and then plus from our own side, having all the conducive circumstances to be able to practice. Getting those three things together is very, very rare. It doesn't happen often. And I think little Maitri here is, you know, she's a good reminder for us, isn't she? Yeah. She lives at the Abbey. She's around the Dharma a lot. Can she understand it? No. Yeah. So it's kind of, you know, she has very good completing karma for the conditions of her life. But the propelling karma that threw her into an animal rebirth was destructive karma. You know, so having, you know, the ability to listen to the teachings on emptiness being present, the Tathagata, you know, being there, not easy to come by. And we can even see, you know, here, how many people have a difficult time even getting here. Or even they get here, they can't seem to, you know, make it to the meditation hall, or they can't stay in the meditation hall. All sorts of things come up. And every single monastery and Dharma center has the same experience. Yeah, because I've lived at many different places. Yeah. And you see people really trying to come and to listen to teachings, and very difficult to actually have that opportunity. It's not so easy. Okay? So for someone with these three, you know, having the precious human life, having the teachings on emptiness available, having the Tathagata, just having descended in this life. So for somebody with these three rare and supreme prerequisites for the growth of paths, in the knowledge, paths are wisdom, consciousnesses in the mind. For those people, samsara isn't without an end. In other words, for those people, samsara has an end, because those three conditions come together by listening to the teachings, contemplating, meditating on them, they'll gain realizations, they can gain freedom. Okay? So for them, samsara isn't without an end, because the causes and conditions for stopping it are assembled. Okay? But for those without the causes and conditions having assembled together, okay, for those people, samsara does not have an end. You know, at this particular moment, it doesn't have an end. You know, hopefully they can create other causes and conditions and have these three factors come together in the future. But when they don't have them now, at this moment, then the prognosis is samsara doesn't have an end, because it cannot be determined precisely when samsara will end, you know, when they'll get these conditions. Okay? So, yeah, so that's telling us something about samsara having an end or not having an end. And, you know, with respect to samsara's ultimate mode of existence, you can't specify it as having an end or not having an end, because its ultimate mode of existence is emptiness, and that it doesn't, you know, exist within time and space in the same way. Okay? So that's what that last line, rebirths neither has nor has not an end. That's talking from the ultimate viewpoint, the ultimate mode of existence. Okay. Then verse 156 talks about repudiating hope for the future without effort in this life. You know, because Joe Blow before was like, you know, I don't have the time to make effort. And so now Joe Blow is saying, as long as texts exist, there will be spiritual friends and oral transmissions of them. We can therefore try to end samsara in other rebirths. You know? I mean, just look. You have these libraries full of texts. As long as the texts are there, somebody can read them, somebody can understand them, somebody can give you the transmission. So, you know, do it next life. Live it up this life. So Aryadeva says, most people cling to an unwholesome direction. Thus certainly most common beings go to bad migrations. Okay? So this idea of I'll do it in another life, that's assuming, oh, well, I'll just, you know, without making any effort, I'll just have a whole sequence of good lives, no sweat, no problem. And Aryadeva says most people cling to an unwholesome direction. In other words, their minds are filled with ignorance, anger, and attachment. Thus, certainly most common beings go to bad migrations, because they create the causes for more and more suffering due to their uncontrolled mind. So though made texts and their proponents may exist, it's difficult to be a proper listener, because most people cling to the 10 non-virtuous pathways of action and are thus born in unfortunate rebirths. So when you look at the 10 non-virtuous pathways, yeah, and you do a life review, can you say that you haven't done all 10 of them? Okay? Killing of some sort, stealing, unwise or unkind sexual behavior, lying, creating disharmony, harsh words, idle talk, coveting, maliciousness, wrong views. Can you look and say, there's one of those 10 that I've never ever done? Yeah? You know, we can't do that, can we? Yeah, so, and then you look around us in this world, and, you know, how many people are trying to keep good ethical conduct versus how many people, you know, readily lie to get ahead, readily create disharmony. My goodness. You know what happened in Washington. Readily create disharmony, readily use harsh words. readily steal, cause damage to others, and kill, and so on. So considering that, so much of this is going on in the world, then you can see that people, most people create a lot of karma to be born in the lower realms. It's not that every action they do is negative, that's not the case. But, when people do negative actions, we do them really, really well. Yeah? We identify the object well, we have an intention, that acts, that is combined with an affliction. We plan the action very well. We do it meticulously. Afterwards, we rejoice and we feel happy. Yeah? So that's kind of the way it is. So, not only for us, but for, others too. And so as a result of creating such strong, and complete negative actions, they have all the factors in them, then very easy to be born in the lower realms. Yeah, very easy. And since most common beings have unfortunate rebirths, also if you look, are there more human beings and devas, the beings in the upper realms, or are there more beings in the lower realms, in the hellish realm, in the hungry ghost realm, the animal realm? Yeah. I mean, here at the Abbey, the human beings are way outnumbered by the animals and the insects. Now somebody can say, well, of course, you live in the countryside. But even in a city, people are outweighed by animals and insects, and outnumbered. And then when you consider the animals and insects under the ocean, and that most of the world's surface is ocean, I mean, human beings are just very small in number. It's not a common rebirth. So, but having, so since this is the case, then it's difficult to have the conditions come together, of being a good listener, of having the teachings and suchness, of having the Tathagata around. So therefore we should make effort to hear the teachings while all these possibilities are there. So that's why when we have, the opportunity to listen to teachings, we should definitely take it. And not just say, oh, it'll happen next time, or I'm too tired, or, I don't feel like it, or, whatever it is. We should really see the rareness of the opportunity and, take the opportunity to hear the teachings. Even if our tummy hurts, even if our little toe hurts, even if we're in a bad mood, I mean, my own experience is sometimes I don't feel well, or sometimes I'm in a bad mood. I go to the Dharma talk, or sometimes I have to give the Dharma talk, but I always feel better afterwards. Or if I go to puja, I feel better afterwards. Okay, so with the conditions we have, not striving for liberation is like crowning an idiot as a king. Yeah? So the rich and powerful are attached to their own views and don't appreciate the Buddha's words, which are based on reasoning. Yeah. And so they say, how can we give up our views, which we've had for so long? Because they don't want to exercise the mind and really think through things with reasoning. They're just very happy of, well, somebody said it's like this, so I believe, or my family has always followed this, so I believe it, and I'll do it too, or, my boyfriend, girlfriend believes this, so it must be good. Yeah. So, instead of just believing things for that kind of reason, we should really bring up our intelligence and use reasoning and try and think through things very clearly and discern what's accurate and what's not accurate, and what's to practice and what to abandon. Okay, then verse 157 is about saying aversion should be cultivated even to fortunate rebirths. So Joe Blow, again, leave it to Joe Blow. He says, though bad rebirths must be avoided because they are without freedom, we don't have to have aversion for good rebirths because they're happy states. Yeah? So yeah, it's proper, who wants to be born as an animal or a hungry ghost or Helen. But if I can have a precious human life, or the Deva realm where you have sense pleasure deluxe, or maybe even the form of formless realms, these blissful states of concentration, that's not so bad. Why should I, be concerned about that? So Aryadeva says, on earth the maturation of ill deeds is seen to be only deleterious. Thus, to the wise, the world appears similar to a slaughterhouse. Okay, so for ordinary beings on earth, the maturation of ill deeds is seen to be, it's harmful, kind of in a subtle or an unexpected way. But those people aren't wise, For the wise, they see how easy it is to have horrible rebirths. And so they see the world as like a slaughterhouse, where sentient beings again and again are, living their lives. And you live your life and you go through so much effort to do things in your life, and the only thing you wind up with at the end is dying. I mean, when you think of everything we've done in our life, and everything everybody does, to be happy, to keep our body alive, to have pleasure, to feel loved and liked and appreciated, and, and all of this, and yet the end result for everybody is, the consciousness separates from the body, and there's a corpse, and they have a nice memorial service, but we aren't around to enjoy it because we're experiencing the result of our karma. Yeah. I remember when I was very little looking at pictures of my parents when they were children. Do you remember doing that? And how strange it was to see what your parents looked like when they were like 4 or 5 years old or something. I mean, my parents, there weren't so many cameras around those days, so there was just some pictures. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's what they really looked like. That's amazing, And from my perspective, then, it's like, how did they were really young like that? And then I was the young generation. Then there was my parents, and then there was my grandparents. Great-grandparents were long gone. But, the grandparents just seemed really old. There were no pictures of them when they were like little small kids. There was one picture of my grandmother when she was maybe late teens, early 20s. But that's about it. Then that's one grandmother. Yeah. And they were old, and there was this feeling of, I'm young, and then there's another generation, and there's another generation, and we're all in our roles. And then it's like my grandparents' generation, long gone. My parents' generation, almost long gone. Yeah. And then, uh-oh, who's next? Wait a minute, I'm still the younger generation. Yeah. But then it just blows my mind when people come to the Abbey. I remember when John Pell and Alec were here, and they were scanning, Alec was scanning pictures, old pictures I had, and they were looking at these like, oh wow, look what you used to look like. Used to look like. seeing my parents' pictures. Oh, look, you look cute. You just look like this. Yeah? Okay. But, so we don't see the world as a slaughterhouse. We always feel, we're kind of steady and other people die and, And even when we die, we'll have a nice legacy. Yeah. Now, most people create their legacy by having kids. You want to have kids with your name, to carry the whole idea of carrying on the family name and how important that is. You really have to carry on the family name, and that's your legacy. Okay. So even, if you have kids and that's your legacy, how long is that legacy going to be around? Because your kids are going to die. You say, oh, well, then there's my grandkids. They're so sweet. Look, they're a baby right now. But they're going to be old people pretty soon, and they're going to be dead. And you're not going to know your grandkids' grandkids. And they're not going to know you. Or maybe if they go and do some genealogical stuff, they'll find your name. And there will be this huge, genealogical thing. And your name will be on it. Like, when we do genealogy and we have the thing, oh, there's the name, there's so-and-so. So somebody knows your name. Does that make you feel good? Does somebody knowing your name make your life valuable? Yeah? It's so strange, isn't it? And, oh, I found out who my great-great-grand-uncle is, this. His name was blah, blah, and he was married to blah, blah. And we know nothing about their lives. Nothing. Yeah? Maybe we find one little kernel here or there, but after a few generations, we don't know anything about them. And their name is there and gone, and they don't know us, and we don't know them. Yeah? So what use is it thinking that your legacy is your genes? It's really rather foolish, isn't it? Yeah? Then you think, oh, well, my legacy is, I'm building this monastery, and it'll remain for 10,000 years. But kind of in 100 years, they're not going to know who we are. And I remember at the folks at Shasta Abbey saying, that their founder, Geo Kennett, was a woman, and how most people think that, if you're a founder of something, you've got to be a man. So when they buried her and, made the thing, they deliberately put the word she did this and she did that to really emphasize that it was a woman who founded it. And then I was teaching at DFF, and one man was sitting in the front row, and somehow we were talking about something, and he raised his hand, he said, and the founder of Shasta Abbey, he did da-da-da-da-da. And I couldn't help but laugh, because she had only died a few years ago, and already she had become a he in somebody else's mind, So we think people are going to know who we are. Maybe they'll watch this video. But where are we going to be? Where are we going to be? 100 years from now, they watch this video? What's our experience going to be in 100 years? What realm are we going to be born in? Do we have any certainty about it? Nothing. Yeah. And so thinking, oh, well, my legacy isn't, 100 years somebody will watch this video. Well, so what? In terms of an egotistical thing, so what? What good does that do me? If somebody watches this video 100 years ago and 100 years from now and it benefits them, that's useful. But thinking it's my legacy and that makes my life worthwhile and therefore I could go, that's like rubbish, isn't it? Yeah. And just think, in 100 years from now, instead of praising us as the first generation of people who started the Abbey, they're going to go, why did they make Chenrezig Hall like this? This floor plan doesn't make any sense. They should have built this here and built that there and put this here and that there. And, you know, now we have to do so much this and that because these people didn't think very straight. And why didn't they do this, you know? Yeah, you think somebody in 100 years is going to appreciate us? You know? They're going to look at those stupid people. What were they doing? Just like today, we were going, oh, the people who lived here before, you know, they had these curtains. So they're going to look at us. Oh, these people who lived here before, they had these shades. You know? Or they thought this carpeting was beautiful. They thought this layout made sense. What were they thinking? Okay, so forget, you know, this idea of ego's fulfillment and having a legacy of either, you know, biological people or spiritual people who are your descendants who are somehow going to revere and appreciate you. That's not going to happen. You know, it's interesting, we just lived through this big mess in Washington. And I remember in high school, you know, when studying American history and how you had to study the big messes of previous, you know, previous administrations and previous time periods. And just to think that, you know, what we lived through, then somebody else is going to be taking an AP test on it. And somebody else is going to write a doctoral dissertation based on, you know, the fiscal crisis of 2013. Yeah, and they'll get credit for this. They'll get a PhD. You know, but the whole thing is, whatever they write about, is it going to be the truth? Is it going to really touch the real experience of what people in this country went through? You know, 800,000 people on furlough. Yeah, and I mean, just what so many people went through, is somebody's PhD even going to capture that? Get it. You know, they'll quote this senator and that representative, and, you know, and they'll have a lot of opinions. Somebody will write a PhD from the Democrats' viewpoint, somebody else will write a PhD from the Republicans' viewpoint. So what? So what? Yeah, so if you think, oh, my name will be known, oh, just think, some poor high school senior is going to have to take an AP test about me. Okay, so it is, so Aryadeva says, it is proper to feel aversion to both good and bad rebirths, okay? So don't just think, oh, you know, proper to not want a bad one, but good ones are good. You know, don't think like that. The remains of polluted karma debilitate even those in good rebirths. Okay, so we're born with defective senses, deformed limbs, we're born poor. We have all sorts of different obscurations that are karmic results. Yeah, so you know, these are unwanted maturations of karma. So, you know, don't think, oh, well, I don't want a bad rebirth, but a good one is fine, because even the rebirth in the human realm, there's so many ways and situations of being born into extreme suffering. Okay, so those who are rich and don't think about the future, about future lives, but create negative karma, first experience the maturation of that negative karma in the hell realm, and then after that karma has ripened in the hell realm, then when they're born as humans, then they experience different difficulties as a human. Okay, so this doesn't just apply to people who are rich, but any of us. if we create negative karmas, yeah, with all the factors complete so that they become a propelling karma, they're, that ignorance, that karmic formation is started another chain of the 12 links. First, that karma ripens as the birth, the realm that you're born into. And when it's exhausted as that effect, then another karma will ripen, maybe, and let's say you're born as a human being, but you still have parts of that negative karma that have yet to ripen. So maybe they'll ripen when you're a human being, and you'll have some problem, some chronic illness, or some kind of impediment, or you'll be born in a war-torn place, or, there's some other, it ripens then as a completing karma, giving some kind of other situation in the human life. Okay? So, the thing is, don't get smug and secure and think, oh, it's all okay, because it's not. And, this is the big thing that the Buddhas are trying so hard to tell us. We hear these kind of teachings over and over and over again, and yet it's so hard to get it through our thick skulls so that we get some kind of experience about, where our complacency gets shaken, and we have some fear, wisdom fear, and some concern about the danger, because we're so ignorant that, we hear this and we say, oh yes, that's right, let's go get a chocolate soda. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And so it's so hard for us to really get some experience of the truth of this so that it really affects how we live our lives. Yeah? And so that's why we have to hear the teachings again and again, think about them, meditate on them, do all these things again and again, to kind of break through this incredible layer of ignorance. Questions or comments?
I'm having trouble cultivating the wisdom fear right now these days. I would say the other kind of fear is from the show. Mm-hmm. So I get that this place is a slaughterhouse, but mostly I'm scared to death.
Mm-hmm. So you want to have, to get the wisdom fear, you do need to be scared, yeah, but not the panicky, freaked out kind of scared. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do have to have a sense of, yeah, I'm afraid because this could happen. Yeah, but the difference is, with the panicky one is, I'm afraid because this is happening, and you're like a deer frozen in the middle of the road. You can't do anything because of your fear. Mm-hmm. With the wisdom fear is like, yeah, I'm scared because this could happen, and I need to abandon, there's something I can do. I can abandon negative actions. I can do purification. I can create a lot of merit. I can study the scriptures. I can meditate on the scriptures. And so you feel like, oh, there's something that I can do. You're not just frozen in that fear.
And so with that in mind, does that then allow you to sleep at night?
In some ways, it seems if you have a real realization of this, you're not going to you may not be able to sleep, but it's not because you're tossing and turning, it's because you're doing virtuous activities. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So, you do need to sleep and rest and keep your body healthy. But if it's tossing and turning, then it's not the wisdom fear. Because the wisdom fear is going to have you be wide awake and doing some practice. Okay.
found that in the past few weeks, I've come to realize that when I go to bed, my mind is just like nowhere. You know, it's often planning the next day, or it's often some trip. And then in the morning, it's usually got this, oh man, it's 4:30 already, I can't believe it, you know. So in the past few weeks, I've been making very strong intentions that when I go to bed at night, I visualize Chenrezig, you know, with his arms around me, or I think about this whole thing about putting my head in the Buddha's lap. You know, so I have some kind of sense of peace, some kind of sense that I've done, you know, I look over the day, how did I do, you know, and think about how I can, you know, catch things better. And so I really have started to take it much more seriously about the state of the mind that I go to bed with, and the state of the mind that I wake up with. And I never thought how much that influenced me as much as I had been really noticing lately.
Yeah.
Because I kind of check out after 8:30. You know, after meditation, I checked off the time, you know, that the punch card is gone. And then it doesn't get punched in until I show up in the hall. And there's all this 8 hours of time that I don't have any virtue being created because I'm kind of checked out. So I'm trying to increase that, knowing that that's a precious time because my mind is going into sleep. And if I should die, it'd be nice to have something in my mind besides,
That's virtuous,
you know, what I gotta do tomorrow.